The steak knives flashed under low light, and my father lifted his wine like a gavel. "Don't mind Rebecca," he told Amelia, voice slick as the mahogany table. "She's our little project." I'm Rebecca Hayes, 28, the quiet one in a family that measures love in square footage. My brother Mark, perfect suit, perfect grin, leaned back. "Maybe I can get you an internship, BK, answering phones." My mother patted my hand like I was fragile glass. "She's still working on her little computer project." I stared at the linen fold, breathing through the heat crawling up my neck. The waiter ghosted by. Silver chimed. Money scented the room. Across from me, Amelia, sharp eyes, partner at a VC firm, kept doing the one thing no one at that table ever did. She asked me questions. "What market are you targeting? What's your user acquisition for Q1 and Q2? Mark puffed. My parents shifted. They could talk curb appeal all night, but this wasn't curb appeal. This was language they couldn't fake. My father cut across her. "Honey, it's some app, one of a million." He waved me off like a fly. Laughter, thin and practiced, made a ring around my chair. Then Amelia stilled, fork down, a click like a trigger. Her voice lowered. "What did you say the name of your company was?" I felt it, power, small and solid, landing in my chest. I met her eyes. I said the name. Silence. A beat where the room seemed to tilt. "Wait," she said, searching my face. "Your name is Rebecca Hayes. You're the founder." The world narrowed. My father's smile cracked. My mother's grip loosened on my shoulder. Mark's mouth hung open, empty of punchlines. Amelia unlocked her phone and turned the screen. A major industry feature on a hidden founder building, something that moves the world. Not my photo, just a logo strong enough to blot out the tablecloth's shine. No speech, no victory lap, just the clean sound of their silence filling the space where I used to apologize for existing. I folded my napkin. "It was a pleasure to meet you," I told Amelia, and meant it. To my family, nothing. I didn't need to. I walked out into the cool night, the city air rinsing off the grease of pity. If you've ever been treated like a problem to be fixed instead of a person to be loved, come sit with me. Share where you're watching from. Subscribe if this is your story too. Your voice matters here. And if you want to know how we got to that table, how the jokes, the loans, the locked doors sharpened into this moment, keep listening. The night air cooled my skin, but inside my chest, everything still burned. Their silence at that table was the first time I'd felt any measure of power, yet it wasn't born in that room. It came from years of cuts, small, sharp, relentless. I thought of the month before, when my parents had opened the doors of our family home for a networking event. Their house gleamed like a showroom, polished floors, crystal glasses clinking, the hum of voices about investments and projections. I hadn't been invited. I only found out scrolling through my aunt's social media feed. There they were, my father's arm slung around Mark's shoulders, my mother beaming beside Amelia, champagne raised high. My chest tightened. Everyone who mattered in their world had been gathered, and I hadn't even rated a text. I called my mom the next day, my voice already heavy. "Why didn't you tell me?" Her reply was bright, airy, like she was brushing lint from a dress. "Oh, sweetie, it was very high-level business talk, all numbers and projections. We didn't want to feel out of place." Out of place. The phrase lodged like a stone in my throat. It wasn't a slip. It was the message. You do not belong. You are not one of us. I hung up and sat in the quiet of my apartment, the blue light from my laptop washing over my face. Around me, out containers, code windows, book filled with diagrams no one in my family had ever cared to ask about. My chest ached, not from her words, but from what they revealed. They weren't just misunderstanding me anymore. They were erasing me. That dull ache flared again at the 4th of July barbecue. It was one of those thick summer days. The air smelled of charcoal and cut grass. Children darted with sparklers while men gathered around the grill. I'd found a patch of shade, talking to a neighbor I hadn't seen in years. For a moment, it felt normal. Then my father's booming voice cut across the yard. My son Mark is making real moves, set to take over the family business." He lifted his beer in salute. Laughter rippled. And then, like a dagger wrapped in humor, he added, "And my daughter, Rebecca, she's following her passion." The word passion bent under his tongue, turned sour, mocking. The circle of men chuckled. My face burned hot. I saw pity slide across my neighbor's smile as she turned the subject to the weather, mercy in her eyes. But I couldn't unhear his laughter, the crowd's polite chuckles. I stood near the fence for the rest of the afternoon, invisible, until it was safe to leave. Driving home, his voice echoed in my head, passion, as if my work was a punchline. Then came Mark's call, the week of the engagement dinner. His voice dripped with sugar, too sweet to be real. "Hey, Beck," he said, "I was just thinking, with the dinner coming up, things are probably a little tight right now." I waited. I knew what was coming. "Maybe I could loan you a few hundred, just so you can buy a nice new dress. Amelia's family will be there and first impressions matter." I clenched my phone so hard my knuckles went white. A loan. From my brother. Not kindness, but control. A reminder of my place in the hierarchy, the one who needed charity just to look presentable. "Thanks, Mark," I said, my voice flat, almost dangerous. "But I already have something to wear. I'll be fine." "Are you sure?" he pressed. "It's no big deal." "I'm sure," I said, and ended the call before the fury boiling inside me spilled out. I sat back in my chair, staring at the glow of my laptop. On the screen, an email confirming the details of a wire transfer, a seed funding round worth more than my father made in a year. My brother wanted to loan me a few $100s. Meanwhile, I was finalizing 7 figures. The irony nearly suffocated me. They saw ramen cups, secondhand clothes, a 1-bedroom apartment, and assumed failure. They never saw the 6 a.m. calls with Berlin, the contracts I signed in silence, the empire quietly growing line by line of code. They thought my silence was shame, but it was strategy. Bound by NDAs, waiting for the right moment, I had no choice but to let them think I was small. Every pitying glance, patronizing pat on the hand, every joke at my expense, each one was a stone stacked in a wall I was building between us. That's why when I sat at that steakhouse table and my father said, "Our little project," it wasn't just an insult. It was the echo of every exclusion, every laugh, every fake offer of help, the weight of years pressing down. And yet, even in those darkest moments, there was a spark, a quiet determination that they could not see. Every time they dismissed me, I worked harder. Every time they excluded me, I built higher. Their rejection became the rhythm of my resolve. Still, it hurt, sitting alone while their parties sparkled, standing in a backyard as strangers laughed at my father's punchline, hearing my brother's voice twist concern into control. The pain wasn't just in being underestimated, it was in being unseen. By the time I walked into that engagement dinner, my skin was already mapped with scars invisible to the eye, and when Amelia's questions cut through the noise, when her fork clicked against porcelain and she whispered for my company's name, it wasn't just a business moment. It was every wound I'd carried finally demanding air. The truth is, I didn't know then how far their silence could push me. I didn't realize that humiliation can become fuel, that being cast out can become freedom. What I did know, sitting at that table, watching their faces crack when Amelia said my name, was that their years of ridicule had only sharpened me. And they weren't done, not yet, because what happened in that steakhouse was only the opening act of a reckoning they never saw coming. They weren't done, not yet. That night, leaving the steakhouse, I felt the cool air sting against my cheeks like a cleansing slap. Their silence had been loud. I knew it wouldn't last. My father's pride, my mother's obsession with appearances, Mark's need for control, they would regroup. They always did. The next performance would come, another scene where I'd be cast as the family failure. And so, I prepared, not with speeches or revenge, but with the kind of quiet work they could never see. Mornings began in darkness. The first buzz of my phone at 5:45 a.m. dragged me from sleep. By 6:00, I was on Zoom, staring at faces pixelated by time zones. Berlin, Warsaw, Singapore. Bright-eyed engineers already sipping their morning coffee while I clutched mine, steam curling in the dim light of my apartment kitchen. My laptop hummed like a heartbeat, screens filled with code, flowcharts, endless spreadsheets. We weren't building some app. We were mapping arteries of global trade, redesigning the circulatory system of how goods moved across continents. No one in my family knew. They never asked. By 9:03 a.m., they were probably teeing off at the country club, sunlight flashing on rented smiles. By then, I'd already survived 3 hours of investor calls, analyzing burn rates, negotiating equity splits, adjusting roadmaps. While they posed for photographs at charity galas, I was in sweatpants, cross-legged on the floor, drafting contracts that would be notarized in 3 languages. And still, the echoes of their voices followed me. Don't mind Rebecca, she's our little project. She's following her passion. Maybe I could loan you a few hundred. I typed harder when those echoes came, fingers pounding keys like hammers driving nails into the coffin of their narrative. Every cruel chuckle replayed in my head as motivation. If they needed me to be small, I'd let them believe it, until I could show them just how colossal small could become. But secrecy weighed heavy. My NDA was a lock on my tongue. Friends asked what I was working on, and I shrugged. Family mocked, and I stayed silent. Loneliness became its own language. The only ones who knew the truth were scattered across continents, people I might never meet in person. At 3 a.m., when the code crashed, it was a developer in Berlin who heard my groan through the speaker, not anyone in my bloodline. Still, those unseen hours grew me. They taught me discipline sharper than any insult. I remember one night vividly. It was close to midnight. My apartment was silent except for the drone of my laptop fan. Outside, traffic whispered along wet streets. On my desk, a signed PDF glowed, confirmation of funds hitting our account, 7 figures. I leaned back, rubbed my eyes, and laughed, alone. Not the loud, too bright laugh of my parents' parties, but something quieter, a release. I thought of Mark offering me a loan for a dress, my father pulling out his platinum card to cover dinner like it was a charitable act, my mother squeezing my shoulder, saying she hoped a nice young man would take care of me. If only they knew. But that was the paradox. I couldn't tell them. I had to let their underestimation ferment, to mature into the perfect reveal. Like a bottle of wine aging in the dark, my silence would make the truth stronger. Meanwhile, life outside my apartment carried on. Invitations from my parents trickled in. Brunch at the club, another dinner with important people. I declined each time. I'm busy, I'd say, and it was the truest sentence I'd ever spoken. Sometimes, though, I'd let curiosity win. I'd scroll their photos. Mark and Amelia framed in chandeliers glow, my parents beaming in sequined dresses, wine glasses raised. Every image pressed the bruise deeper. They were crafting a world where I didn't exist. And maybe that was the point. I began to realize that my exclusion wasn't oversight, it was curation. They wanted a story they could sell to the world, the perfect family, successful son, glamorous fiancé. My presence cluttered that narrative. My small apartment, my unbranded clothes, my silence, it didn't fit. So they cut me out. Fine, I thought, cut me out. A blank space can be louder than a crowded picture. Still, I wasn't immune. There were nights I lay awake staring at the ceiling, replaying the 4th of July humiliation, hearing the chuckles, feeling my face burn again. There were mornings when Mark's voice replayed in my head, syrupy sweet, offering me that loan. My chest would tighten until I sat up, breath shallow. But then the laptop screen would light my face. Notifications pinging, contracts waiting, investors betting millions on my vision. That was real. That was mine. Step by step, I trained myself to pour the pain back into the work. Every dismissal became fuel. Every memory of exclusion powered another line of code. Another pitch deck refined at 2 a.m., another strategy call held with unshakable calm. I wasn't plotting revenge. I was building inevitability. And slowly, opportunities aligned. Amelia's firm wasn't the only one sniffing around. Articles whispered about an anonymous founder making waves in logistics. Venture scouts traded rumors. The invisible founder, one headline teased. I read it with my coffee one morning, smiling at the irony. Invisible to them, maybe, not to the world. I printed the article, pinned it above my desk, right beside the photo of me and my mom from years ago, her hand on my shoulder, her smile brittle even then. The contrast steadied me, the woman who called me out of place, and the evidence that my place was expanding beyond anything she could imagine. When I closed my laptop at night, the apartment would fall into silence, but it wasn't the silence of shame anymore. It was the silence of strategy, of waiting. So when the engagement dinner came, when my father sneered one of a million apps, when Mark puffed out his chest and spoke of real visionaries, I was ready. Not for a fight, not for revenge, but for the quiet, devastating reveal that comes when years of dismissal meet the solid wall of undeniable truth. And Amelia, sharp, observant, unwilling to be fooled, was about to light the match. Amelia was about to light the match. Her fork clicked against porcelain, her eyes steady on mine, and for a heartbeat I felt like I had the whole table in my hands. Power, sharp and clean. But power has a way of slipping through fingers, especially when your family is desperate to keep their world intact. Because after that dinner, the storm didn't stop. It only gathered force. At first, it was silence, the kind that hummed with dread. My father avoided my calls, which wasn't unusual. But now there was a weight to it, a fracture running under his charm. My mother sent one text, "Let's talk when you're ready." And then, nothing more. Mark, though, was never one to sit in silence. 3 days later, my phone lit up with his name. I almost ignored it. Almost. But I swiped, curiosity getting the better of me. "Beck," he said, voice low, measured. "We need to clear the air." I didn't respond. The sound of his breathing filled the pause. "You embarrassed us," he said finally. "At that dinner. That wasn't fair." My hand clenched around the phone. Embarrass them? As if years of mockery, exclusion, and pity were nothing compared to a moment where the truth slipped into daylight. "You lied," I said evenly. "For years. You let them believe I was nothing." Mark's tone hardened. "You could have told us. You could have prepared us. Instead, you blindsided everyone." Amelia was furious. I almost laughed. Furious? I'd seen her face at that table. Shocked, yes. Calculating, maybe. But furious? That was Mark's projection, his fear of losing control. "I don't owe you preparation," I said. "I owe myself honesty." He exhaled hard. "You don't get it, Beck. You made us look like fools. Dad's reputation, Mom's social circle, it matters, and you—" His voice cracked with something almost like panic. "You could ruin everything." There it was. Not concern, not love, self-preservation. My success, instead of elevating us all, threatened to unravel the story they'd built around themselves. That night, I barely slept. His words needled into me, reopening old doubts. Was I cruel to stay silent? Should I have tried harder to bridge the gap, to explain the truth sooner? My apartment walls closed in, shadows stretching long across the floor as I stared at the ceiling. And then came the message that broke whatever hesitation I had left. It was an email forwarded by a friend who worked in finance. Attached was a newsletter, local business gossip. The headline burned, "Real Estate Titan's Daughter, Founder or Fraud." The article dripped skepticism. Anonymous quotes suggested my success was exaggerated, maybe even fabricated. "She's always been unstable," one line read. Another, "Sounds like a vanity project propped up by overseas money." My stomach turned cold. I knew whose fingerprints were all over it. My family had spent years feeding that narrative. Rebecca the lost cause, the charity case. All it took was one phone call from them to a reporter, one slip of a whisper, and the story blossomed like mold. And suddenly, everything I'd built felt fragile. Investors read these things. Partners hesitated when doubt seeped into the air. The higher the stakes, the more delicate trust became. That week, every call with my team felt heavier. "Are we solid with the funding?" my CTO asked, worry flickering in his eyes from Berlin. "Investors are asking questions." I told him yes, firm and certain. But inside, panic gnawed. I'd fought so hard to stay invisible until I was ready. Now exposure had come in the worst way, through their smear, not my story. The lowest point came when one of the investors, the same one who had praised my vision months earlier, sent me a curt message. "We should revisit valuation discussions pending recent press." Valuation discussions. Investor code for, "We're losing confidence." I shut my laptop and sat in the dark, head in my hands. For the first time in years, I questioned it all. Was I just fooling myself? Was my family right? That I didn't belong in their world or any world of real power? The memory of my father's laugh at that barbecue returned, his voice booming, "She's following her passion." That word, dripping with mockery, echoed through my chest. Now, it wasn't just family gossip. It was on screens, in inboxes, infecting the perception of people who controlled millions. I wanted to fight back, to scream, to post screenshots of contracts, bank transfers, legal documents, to shove proof into the world's face. But NDAs wrapped around me like chains. Breaking them could shatter everything I'd worked for. So I sat, silent, again. Days blurred. My apartment felt smaller, my work heavier. Calls stretched into the night, my voice tight, my answers rehearsed. I was holding the line, but barely. The irony crushed me. The same silence that had been my strategy was now my prison. And my family, whether by malice or ignorance, had found a way to weaponize it. One night, near midnight, I opened the article again, scrolled the lines until they blurred. Founder or fraud? The question mark carved into me. Tears came hot and sudden, streaking down my face onto the keyboard. For years, I'd borne their dismissal in silence. But this public doubt, cut deeper. It wasn't just their laughter echoing in backyards anymore. It was strangers reading about me and wondering if I was a liar. In that moment, for the first time in my journey, I considered giving up, letting go of the fight, walking away from the dream. The weight of their voices pressed down, almost convincing me that maybe they were right. Maybe I was out of place. Maybe I wasn't one of them or anyone. I curled up on the couch, lights off, the hum of the refrigerator the only sound. My phone buzzed again with messages I didn't answer. Investors, my team, even Amelia, unreadable in her sudden outreach. I let it all sit in silence. Because for that one night, the silence wasn't strategy. It was surrender. And that was the closest I ever came to believing them. That night on the couch, swallowed by silence, I thought I had broken. But the human heart has a strange resilience. It bends until it feels it will snap, and then it beats harder. Morning light leaked through the blinds, painting thin stripes across my living room. I woke with stiff limbs and swollen eyes, my phone buzzing on the coffee table. A dozen missed calls. Amelia's name stood out among the investors and developers. I stared at it, my chest tightening. Why would she call? Out of pity? Out of anger? Out of curiosity? Something inside me steadied. Enough. I brewed coffee, the bitter scent filling the apartment, and opened my laptop. The article still glared back. Founder or fraud? I read it again, slower this time, dissecting every word. Anonymous quotes, hints that only people close to me could provide. My father's phrasing, my mother's euphemisms, Mark's tone, they bled through the lines. My own family had armed the world with doubt. I wiped my cheeks dry with the back of my sleeve. If they wanted a war, they would get one. Not in tabloids, not in whispers, but in daylight with proof. The first step was my team. On our next 6 a.m. call, I didn't hide the article. I shared my screen. Berlin, Warsaw, Singapore. Faces tightened, jaws clenched. This doesn't change who we are, and I told them, voice steady. It doesn't change what we've built, but it means we fight smarter now. We can't wait for the launch to speak for itself. We have to control the narrative. Silence. Then my CTO leaned forward. So we go public. The words rang through me. I'd been holding the company in stealth, afraid of exposure, bound by NDAs and fear of being underestimated. But now, staying hidden only gave my family's whispers power. Yes, I said slowly, we go public, on our terms. And so the plan shifted. Press kits prepared, contracts finalized, a launch timeline accelerated. Investors who'd wavered would see proof, not in rumors but in hard numbers, working product, market traction. Every waking hour became fire, calls stacked into the night, drafts rewritten, decks polished, strategies rehearsed. My exhaustion burned into determination. And then Amelia reached me. It was a Thursday evening when her name flashed again. This time, I answered. Rebecca, she said, tone clipped, but calm. We need to meet. I hesitated, but curiosity won. Where? Neutral ground, not your family's orbit. Tomorrow, 10 a.m., Bluebird Cafe. Click. The next morning, I arrived early. The cafe smelled of espresso and warm bread, sunlight spilling across scratched wooden tables. Amelia walked in sharp, tailored, her eyes scanning until they landed on me. She didn't sit right away. You blindsided me, she said quietly. At dinner. I met her gaze. You blindsided me, too, with questions my family wasn't prepared for. Her lips curved faintly, acknowledging the point. Then she sat. You should know, she said, leaning in. Your family has been doing damage control, Mark especially. He's told people you're unstable, that investors should be careful. The words sliced, but I didn't flinch. I expected as much. And yet, she continued, I read the article. Beneath the noise, there's substance. Too much to ignore. You've built something real. I sipped my coffee, waiting. My firm still wants in, she said flatly, but we can't play in shadows. If you go public, if you show proof, we'll back you. Her eyes locked on mine, fierce. But you need to understand, this puts you directly against your family. The same people who fed this narrative. I set my cup down. They've been against me all along. This just makes it official. She studied me, then nodded once. Business mask on, but respect flickered underneath. The reckoning came fast. Word spread of our upcoming announcement, strategic leaks to the right journalists, carefully placed whispers to industry contacts. The narrative began to shift. Anonymous founder prepares major reveal. Investors who had hesitated now circled back, curious again. My family panicked. Mark called first, voice raised, anger breaking through his practiced charm. You're destroying us, Beck. Do you understand? Every article about you drags our name through the mud. Dad's furious. Mom can't show her face at the club. I let him rant. Then I said, calm as steel, maybe stop feeding the mud. He sputtered. You think you're better than us? No, I said. I just know I'm not less. And I hung up. The confrontation escalated at my parents' house 2 nights later. Against my better judgment, I went. Maybe I wanted closure. Maybe I wanted them to look me in the eye when they tried to cut me down. The house smelled of lemon polish and expensive candles. My mother stood in the foyer, hands clasped tight, eyes pleading. My father waited in the living room, drink in hand, Mark pacing like a caged dog. Rebecca, my father began, voice smooth as ever, you've caused quite a stir. Investors are calling us, asking questions. This publicity is dangerous. Dangerous. That was the word he chose for my success. You could fix this, he said. Step back. Let Mark handle the business side. You're clearly overwhelmed. My laugh was sharp, humorless. Overwhelmed? I'm leading a global team, securing funding you can't dream of. And you still think I need a babysitter? Mark lunged forward. You embarrassed us in front of Amelia. Do you realize what that did? What it did, I snapped, was show her who the visionary was. And it wasn't you. Silence. My mother flinched. My father's jaw tightened. Mark's face reddened. "This family has always supported you," my mother whispered, desperation creeping in. "Supported me?" My voice cracked with anger. "You excluded me from your parties. You mocked me at barbecues. You offered loans to make me presentable. That's not support. That's sabotage wrapped in pity." Their faces told me I'd struck truth. "I don't need your approval," I said, breath trembling but firm. "I never did. But I won't let you destroy what I've built just to protect your image." The room buzzed with unspoken words. For once, I didn't back down. I walked out, the click of my heels on marble echoing through the hollow silence they left me in. Days later, our launch went live. Press releases, demos, hard proof of contracts, partnerships, and product. The same outlets that had questioned me now ran headlines. Stealth founder revealed Rebecca Hayes disrupts logistics. Amelia's firm led the round. Numbers confirmed. Doubt silenced. And my family? They had nothing left to say. But the war wasn't about headlines. It was about reclaiming voice, about proving that every pat on the hand, every mocking laugh, every cruel dismissal had been wrong. When I saw Mark at a follow-up event, Amelia at his side, his eyes slid away. No smug grin, no charity offers, just the hollow recognition that he'd lost control of the narrative. And for the first time, I felt not just vindicated, but free. When the headlines broke, when my name stopped being a whisper and became a story stamped across the front of business journals, I thought I would feel triumphant. But what I felt most was stillness. At the launch event, cameras flashed, microphones pressed forward, and investors nodded with the kind of sharp approval my family had always reserved for Mark. I stood at the podium, hair pulled back, blazer crisp, voice steady. The words I spoke weren't dramatic, just facts, numbers, partnerships, vision. But every syllable carried the weight of years when my silence had been misread as failure. Afterward, in the crowded hall, I saw him, Mark standing stiff beside Amelia, his smile a thin mask. He didn't approach. His eyes slid past me, as if looking directly at me would burn. Amelia, though, gave me the smallest nod. Professional, neutral, but I caught it. The acknowledgement of equals. That was the moment I realized I didn't need them to see me anymore. For so long, I had measured myself against their rejection. Every exclusion, every laugh, every cutting word had defined my fire. But now, with the world watching, I understood. Their approval had never been the prize. Their silence wasn't punishment. It was freedom. Walking out of that event, the city air smelled different, lighter, less sharp. I passed a storefront window and caught my reflection. Not the invisible daughter, not the little project, but a woman standing in her own story. At night, back in my apartment, I sat by the window with a mug of tea and looked out over the city lights. For the first time, I didn't feel the ache of being left out. I felt the expanse of possibility. My family hadn't lost me at that dinner. They had lost me years ago with every dismissive word. What they lost now was the privilege of claiming any part of what I had built. And I didn't feel bitterness, just clarity. Because here's the truth. Family betrayal cuts deep. Being laughed at, dismissed, erased, it leaves scars that don't fade overnight. But scars can guide you too. They remind you where you've been. They remind you of what you survived. If you're listening to this and you've been treated like a problem to be fixed instead of a person to be loved, know this. Your story doesn't end in their laughter. It doesn't end at their table. It begins the moment you decide their version of you isn't the final draft. I don't need my father's applause or my mother's approval or my brother's permission to exist, and neither do you. What I needed, what I fought for, was to believe in myself when no one else did. The night they called me a joke, I drove home with my chest burning. The night they cut me from their parties, I scrolled through photos with tears in my eyes. The night my brother offered me a loan to make me presentable, I clenched my phone until my knuckles ached. And yet every single one of those nights carried me here, to a life that is mine, unshakable, undeniable. So if you've ever been mocked for your dream or cut out of the picture because you didn't fit their version of success, Hear me. You are not their punchline. You are not their project. You are your own story. And sometimes the loudest revenge isn't revenge at all. It's simply walking forward, free. Have you ever had to prove yourself to people who doubted you? Maybe even your own family? Tell me in the comments where you're listening from. I want to know your story. Because here, your voice matters.